audience, I'm here with Jeff Wald, entrepreneur extraordinaire and the author of The End of Jobs, The Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. Jeff, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Frank.
Oh, my pleasure, buddy. I love this book, and it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I figured let's get right to the source and talk to you about it. So let's start like from the beginning. I'm just curious. Whenever I think of an executive, let alone kind of an entrepreneur, someone literally running a company, I think of the work involved in authoring a book. 9 out of the 10 people that think about doing it never even start. And here you are, you start it, and like everything you do, you finish it, and like everything you do, you're successful. So what prompted you? What was the impetus or the genesis behind this book?
Well, I will say that A, it took me 7 years to finish it. So, and B, I had a lot of help. So there were a number of people, from researchers to people that would help me write some sections, to obviously editors and copy editors and things like that. So huge amount of help. But to your question, what led me to write the book was frustration. It was frustration with people making predictions about the future of work outside of a body of evidence. And I find anybody that does anything, quite frankly, outside a body of evidence a little frustrating. But making predictions about the future of work when there is such tremendous amounts of evidence out there. And when I think about evidence in our world, Frank, in this world of work, I think about the history of work. I think about the data patterns of work. And I think about how companies actually engage workers. And people that make predictions without the grounding in those three, drive me a little nuts. And so there was one prediction in particular. And that was that 50% of the labor force is going to be on demand by 2020. And that's the prediction everybody was making in 2010. And people made that prediction simply because the on-demand labor market grew from 2009 to 2010 by like 4 or 5%. They're like, oh, if it continues on these roads.
Right.
Okay, if it continues, it won't, it didn't. But for years and years and years, everybody used that statistic up until like 2018. I was like, it hasn't really grown much over the last 8 years. Do you think it's going to massively grow over the next 2? Like, why do people keep saying that? And so I found that very frustrating. And I thought, the first iteration of the book was just about the on-demand labor market. And then as I started to unpack it, I went a little broader.
All right, makes sense. You figured let's get a little data behind this. Enough guessing and prognosticating makes total sense. I tell you, just at the very beginning, when I cracked open the book, I thought it was really awesome that you started out with the history of work, all right, this concept of the job, which, maybe most of us assume that, it was always the job, right? Back to the Cro-Magnon days. Somebody got up, it was 9 to 5 or whatever, maybe a commute, who knows? Politics, Stone Age politics. So would you, just with the limited time we have, and I have a handful of questions I want to get to you, but what are some of the highlights that you found interesting when you did your research as to history of work?
Sure. Well, first is, as we think about robots and AI, it's important to us understand that as a new technology comes on stream that has tremendous productivity increases, we often see in history everyone predict, oh my gosh, that's the end of jobs, and society's gonna fall. And it never happens. And specifically, we look at the 3 previous step functions of technological change: mechanization, electrification, and computerization, and how companies, workers, and society had to deal with the fact that at first blush, companies needed a lot fewer workers to produce the same amount of output, and everyone was freaking out. But then the process goes through where it lowers the price of goods, more people can afford the goods, now more goods need to be made.
Right.
And every single time we ended up with some very, very important things. One is more jobs. Second is a higher standard of living. And third is that people worked fewer hours. Those are very clear data trends throughout the history of work. And as we stand on the precipice of this 4th technological step function, this 4th great leap forward in technology, again, we have people saying, oh my God, the robots are going to take all of our jobs. And you want to say, okay, well, it may be, that might be true, but what is your evidence for making that conclusion? Because here's the way it's played out each time. And as we all know, history tends to rhyme. And I see no reason why it will be any different this time.
Okay, so of the people I speak to, so I'm pretty much in the automation and AI world these days, and I pretty much break people I speak to into two camps, oversimplified nonetheless, but there's pessimists and optimists when it
Sure.
comes to the future. Um, so I was going to ask you this question on the back end, but you just started there. So let's just go there, Jeff. So fair to say that you're, for the most part, as of this moment, pending any further data, you're for the most part an optimist,
I
right?
am an optimist. I think that we will end up with more jobs. I think we'll end up with a higher standard of living and working few hours. However, Frank, I am a realist in as much as it's easy to say that at the end of the first industrial revolution, we were better off. Second, we were better off. Third, we were better off. That is not to say the transitions were easy.
Right.
These are tremendous dislocations for society. And if we don't do the transition well, it is going to be a very rough road. We will end up at a better place, but it's incumbent upon all of us to do this transition as intelligently as possible to make it as smooth as possible. Otherwise, we're in for a very rocky road.
So so while we're here, so what if you were in charge, um, what would you do? What would you have in place as certain jobs? I mean, listen, you've discussed some of these things. Is it more about cross training? Is it about more government policy? Is it certain company policies, or any thoughts along those lines? I don't expect you to
Well,
have all the answers, but I know you've mulled this over.
I will tell you this, I actually do have the answer here. And the answer is that I don't have the answer. But what we need to do is fix our election process and have nonpartisan primaries and open primaries and mandatory voting and term limits so we get the right men and women in the room that can come up with the right long-term solutions for society, because the way we're doing it now ain't working.
Right.
So
That's a
that's
fair
my
point.
magic wand wave. Now, given that I can't wave that wand, I would say retraining, retraining, retraining.
Right.
That the issue that historically societies have faced is that jobs were lost in some industries, created in others. And moving somebody from industry A, their jobs are dying, to industry B, where jobs are growing, is challenging. Now, I don't know whether that's the education system that has to do it, if it's an individual responsibility, if it's companies, either the companies letting people go being responsible for paying, or the companies hiring, paying for incremental training. But all three of those parties will be involved. And so retraining to me is the key area that we need to focus on to make sure that we don't exacerbate the existing gaps in society. And we can do this transition as smooth as possible and get people into the high paying, high growth jobs of the
Right.
future.
No, it makes sense. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. So let's talk about you talk about kind of on-demand workers to what agile corporations. The majority of the people I speak to have plain old-fashioned jobs. I would say that that is the most common. Right below that, second on the list, or I would say would be what you and I might consider consultants.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm going to say freelancers,
Sure.
right? Could be a developer, could be a management consultant. So if you take those two categories, would you add a third? I mean, is it that for the most part when you talk about plain old-fashioned job, and then some sort of an advisor or freelancer, contract worker? Are those the two categories as you see the world today?
So I will tell you, when I think about this, what I call the labor plane in the book, which is all of a company's labor resources, certainly full-time workers are one, freelancers are one. I would put in between their part-time workers.
Right.
I'd put temps in there, and then I'd have vendors, robots, drones, AI systems as kind of your complete view of
Mhm.
anyone that could perform a task for your company. But that
Okay.
being said, the vast majority still fall into full-time employee.
So, when I have business meetings, um, uh, after every other meeting, not every, if I say every meeting, that would be an exaggeration. Every other meeting, there's a discussion mostly around some sort of an enterprise AI undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting, very interesting. And then after the meeting, a couple of people move on to the next meeting, one or two people stay, and then I get something like this. Frank, what do you think is really going on?
Right.
How do you think this plays out? I have kids, I have a job. So there is the anxiety, right? It's
100.
exciting, but there's anxiety there, right? For all of us. So what is your advice to the average person in the average company that reads these books and will hopefully read this book, if I get the lighting right? What is your advice to them other than to just, self-medicate?
Well, I'm always a fan of self-medicating, but we'll leave that to a different discussion.